With the first 2 days of the NFL draft in the books, look for the Eagles to grab a wide receiver to complement their stars. Let's check out two of our favorite late round guys.
Now, Tahj Washington, the first thing you'll notice about him is he's extremely small. I believe his measurables are 5'10" and around 180. And he also doesn't have blazing long speed. So you're like, okay, he's small and he's not insanely fast. Why would you ever like a player like this? But here's the thing about Tahj Washington is for a guy who has that small of a frame, he's extremely good at catching in contested catch situations, catching the ball away from his frame, catching the ball along the sidelines with his body control. So for amongst players who do have small frames, I think he's way above average in those departments. He's really good at finding open space. Now, when you're playing with Caleb Williams, who's extending some plays for 5+ seconds, and there's a lot of scramble drills, that's a really nice asset to have. And Hurts also can extend plays. And one of the problems with the Eagles' offense last year was that they floundered in scramble drill situations often. I thought that was something that can be improved, and I think Tahj Washington would be well suited in that role. He's also a guy who's never going to garner that many targets. So when you have these primo top receivers with AJ and Devontae, they're going to soak up a lion's share of the targets. But then you have another guy who's going to get, maybe 30 to 50 targets. I think Washington's perfect in that role. He's an extremely quick player. He's a really savvy route runner from what I saw. Bottom line, he knows how to get open. And when the ball arrives, he catches it. So if you're going to just make it very simple. And he does have a little bit of gadget in him. Now, there's another small guy in the draft, a receiver, Xavier Worthy, who's getting a lot of buzz. And in terms of like a deep threat, yeah, Worthy is far superior to Tahj Washington. But once they actually get the ball in their hands, I saw Tahj as being more dynamic. He's much more shifty and elusive than Worthy. He rarely ever gets tackled by the first guy in open space, which I love. And he just comes across as a heady, competitive football player. And on top of all that, he had really good production. Like, it's kind of crazy how he went under the radar and he put over 1,000 yards and had a fair bit of touchdowns. I don't even think he's that old of a prospect, even though this was his 5th year, I believe. So all those things amounted to me. If you can get a guy like this in the 4th or beyond, I would be thrilled.
Yeah, and I really like Tahj Washington as well. He, like you said, his hands are incredibly good. He catches the ball away from his body with confidence, without breaking stride. He's just got so much trust in his hands. It really helps him after the catch, even though he is a smaller guy. He doesn't have to gear down. He doesn't have to take some gather steps. It's catch, go. And that really helps him turn small gains or intermediate catches into more explosive plays. Now, based on how I rate certain metrics, of all the receivers drafted since 2020, Tahj Washington's catch score ranks in the 97th percentile. Just to give a little bit of a background on how I rank that, I'm taking the catchable catch percentage. So this takes out all the off-target throws that quarterbacks have, and it's only looking at the catchable balls that are thrown his way. And I look at how many of those passes did he catch, what's the percentage of that, and I weight that by the average depth of target. So players that are catching a lot of short 3, 4, 5-yard Malachi Corley type passes, it was a little easier to catch. You start catching some passes further down the field, the ball's in the air longer, you're having to worry about, is this defender coming over? You have to worry about the tracking. Those are harder passes to catch, and he had an incredible catch percentage still with his average depth of target. So I think he's a little underrated.
Yeah, I kind of buried the lead there because his ball tracking is phenomenal. And for these smaller guys who do get a fair bit of their plays down the field, this is one of the most important skills. And he's able to kind of match up the speed of how he's running in concert with the tracking to just catch it in stride, as you mentioned. And putting all those things together, that's kind of a rare combination, especially for a guy who's projected to go so late in the draft. He's also punches above his weight class physically. There were times where he would finish off like yak situations where he's kind of like giving the defensive back the business, which I love to see for a guy who's has a slender frame. Um, he wasn't getting bullied out there, so there really is not much not to like about him. He's never going to be a guy who's like a high production profile, but I think he's going to do really good in the role that he'll likely be cast in.
Yeah. And that's who the Eagles need in that position right now. You need someone that can catch the ball. Then you need someone that can get open and catch the ball at that position. You're not necessarily looking for these guys to be your playmaker, go and get 10 to 12 targets a game and put the offense on your back. He's probably not going to be that player. It's just hard to find a lot of guys of his stature that can handle that kind of workload and just be good enough to do that. But he's a guy that can make explosive plays happen, and he's reliable catching the ball. And I think he's a guy that can attack down the field despite his size. He attacks the ball in the air like he's a bigger receiver. Doesn't always come out with it, but he's got that mentality that when the ball's in the air, I'm going to get it.
Yeah, I would I would be absolutely thrilled with Tahj Washington taken with one of the fourth or fifth round picks. The Eagles do need to add a receiver to this roster. The second round might be a little bit rich considering how much defensive needs they have. So if this is your consolation prize, I'd be very happy with it.
In addition to that, there's another player that will be available probably later than Tahj Washington, who I really like as well. If they don't land Tahj, I think a player that could be a good role player for them would be Ainias Smith out of Texas A&M. He is similar to Tahj in that he's an undersized player. He's not that tall, but he's a little more sturdy. I think he's about 190 or 195 pounds at just 5'9". I mean, that's a pretty thick guy. But he has excellent hands and a knack for finding the soft spots in zone. And he has the ability to get good yards after the catch on underneath and intermediate routes. On catchable passes, Smith had one of the best catch rates in the entire class. I gave him a catch score, like we talked about earlier. His catch score ranked in the 92nd percentile. Like Tahj, he would routinely and confidently extend to catch passes away from his body without breaking stride. And he showed good awareness based on the coverage of where the closest threat would be after the catch, allowing him to make a move immediately after catching. His toughness shows up as he makes catches knowing he's going to take a hit. And he doesn't panic working in traffic, even though he knows there's a chance he might take a shot. There's a great play he had against Alabama where he's running an out route and there's a flat defender that is about to come down on it, but they end up missing the tackle. But he doesn't get alligator arms. He extends all the way, catches the ball, and then he takes it. I think he stepped out of bounds at around the 5-yard line or something. But he made a big play after that. But that comes down to toughness and willingness to go over the middle and extend your body and take hits. His run after the catch ability, especially working over the middle of the field in the short to intermediate range, is one of the best in the class due to his strength packed onto his compact frame. He doesn't have elite speed, so he's probably not going to take a lot of these passes to the house like a guy like Malik Neighbors would. But he has enough play strength and enough elusiveness in the open field to make chunk gains consistently. On throws less than 20 yards down the field, while eliminating screens, he was in the 81st percentile in yards after catch among receivers drafted in the last 5 classes. So when you take out those deep passes and just isolate on the intermediate area, he was one of the better receivers and continually picking up chunk yardage after the catch. In zone coverage, while I don't think he's ever going to be a deep threat, I think he can live in the intermediate range. And he does this by finding space while tempoing his routes to let other receivers clear out the coverage. In addition to that, his ability to make guys miss and run through contact makes him a candidate for a gadget role as well. That's something that Kellen Moore likes to use in his offense. Now, his downsides, he is a smaller player with a very limited catch radius, and that shows up on short routes where the quarterback is a little off target, like on quick slants over the middle. Bigger guys like a Keon Coleman could reach out with their arm with their size and arm length and snag some of those passes that Ainias just can't. Also, his catch radius shows up when he tries to win contested catches on jump balls. He's just not a guy that's going to fight over bigger guys. He's likely never going to be your go-to guy against man coverage. He's more of a wide receiver that finds space against zone and wins after the catch. Unlike other later round smaller slot wideouts like Tahj Washington, he's likely not going to be a deep threat, but I think he's a little bit better working through traffic in the short area to gain some extra yardage. I just don't think Tahj is as strong when it comes to powering through contact. I think he's a little better at making guys miss, but in terms of running through some tackles, I think Ainias is probably a little bit better in that area.
Way better. I think when with these late round prospects, there's kind of two ways you can approach it. One is a total lottery ticket, and the other is we know we can use this guy in some capacity. And I think Smith falls into that role. Um, as we mentioned before, he can be a great return man. I think he as opposed to how what we mentioned before about Tracy and kick returns. I think Smith projects it better as like a punt returner. And in college, he was awesome at that. I'm not very bullish on the idea of him succeeding as an NFL wide receiver, even though he did succeed as a college receiver, kind of because of the shortcomings you mentioned. But if you can get the ball in his hands, like you mentioned, in some of these gadget situations, end arounds, uh, throwing it on like quick little passes where he lines up in the backfield, screen passes, manufacturing ways to get him touches. I think he's really good. Like you'll see sometimes it's very hard to grab him. He's kind of like a boulder there where guys will bounce off of him. He'll just kind of spin through a tackle. He'll finish with power. He's just hard to tackle. And when you watch the A&M games, he got the ball in the hands, and you could kind of see the crowd be like, "Oh!" And they would start to get excited because this guy's like sometimes was electric with the ball.
Yeah.
It's not like he's making unbelievable jump cuts. It's not like he's Derrick Henry stiff arming people, but he's just hard to bring down. And it's like, what even happened? And he gained 20, 30 yards. So in that sense, I think he could be a valuable player.
Yeah, he's like with Tahj, I don't think he's a guy that's going to be a high production player. He's one of those guys you put him in his role, well, you know what his role is, and he can carry out his role. He'll catch the ball, he'll get you yards after the catch, which is something that really the Eagles need. They need a guy that when we give you the ball, you're only going to get it probably two, maybe three times a game. Can you maximize those opportunities? And if he's a player that's put in those positions, like Quez Watkins last year, I think we all remember that Rams play where he's running that bubble route and he has perfect blocking and just runs right into the defender. The Eagles kind of need a guy that can be relied on to make some of those plays or just get a little bit more out of what opportunities that they're given. I think Smith can do that. And when you look at, he's probably going to be, my guess is fifth to sixth round pick. You're either taking a guy that has good athletic traits that maybe can develop into something, but isn't very good at football, or have a guy that's maybe smaller stature, not the greatest athlete, but a good football player. And I think Smith is a good football player. You just got to know how to use him and what role to put him in. And with, like I said, with Tahj and with Ainias, the way the league's going with zone coverage, he doesn't need to be your go-to guy against man coverage. Let him run crossing routes over the middle of the field. Let him find the soft spaces in zone, and then let them work after the catch. And one more thing before we go. I think one easy way to kind of picture, if you haven't watched Ainias Smith play, he's a player in the mold of Amon-Ra St. Brown. I'm not saying he is Amon-Ra, but that's the type of player they are, where they are more working the underneath and intermediate area, and they're making a lot of their stuff happen after the catch, but they're not necessarily making a ton of explosive 30, 40, 50-yard gains down the field because of their athleticism. It's more they catch a little hitch route over the middle and a spacing concept. They make the first guy miss, and the next thing you know, they're picking up chunk gains on, they're turning a little 5-yard catch into a 12-yard catch, and they just can do that over and over and over again. Now, Amon-Ra's better. He's more nuanced. But if you look at their athletic profiles, they're also very similar players and have similar playing styles.
Absolutely. And this is one of those things where the production will heavily be weighted on how the offensive coordinator decides to use them. Like, I couldn't even imagine a better scheme fit for St. Brown. So as it stands, he's looked at as probably a top 15 wide receiver in the NFL. Had he gone to a bad situation, we might be having a totally different conversation about him. Obviously, the wide receiver skills are way more polished, as you mentioned, with St. Brown. But if you're just talking about specifically how they will be employed and then, some of their yak abilities, I think that, that's kind of a fair comparison.